Hello there. Hi. Welcome to Butterfly Effect. I'm your host, Tristan Ettleman. This is a show all about interviewing people. And today we have a great guest, Joey Esposito, comics writer, really cool guy. I'll talk about him in a second. But before that, I just want to thank people that listen. I'm wanting to make this show grow. And so I'm just going to do a little beseeching for your help just to share with people and tell people this is a good thing to listen to if you in fact like it. If you don't like it, you can go ahead and tell people that you don't like it. I mean, I'd rather you not do that, but that's your prerogative. But also that you, if you have people that you want to see on the show specifically, you can email me at trettleman@gmail.com. That's Trettleman. That's my name. And tell me who you want to see on the show, and if you have any feedback on the show or anything like that. So I really appreciate that. That would help a lot. But Joey Esposito is on the show today, and we had a great conversation. This is another one that I did a while ago. So some of the things we talk about are in that time period of September. No, it was October. So that was a while ago, but a lot of it still holds true and is still very relevant. But Joey is a comics writer. We talked about his creator-owned stuff, which is what I know him for. What it was like covering comics for a while at IGN, which he did leading up to doing his own comics, and there's a little bit of overlap there, and we talk about like the weirdness of doing that. And we also talk about kind of early on the one book that he really hates doing. Like he did a book, and he calls it garbage often in the episode. So look forward to that. But I also want to call on you to check out Joey's stuff, specifically like his creator-owned stuff that I really enjoyed. Footprints is it's like this pulp noir story with like urban legends like Bigfoot and Jersey Devil and stuff like that. So it's really cool. It's interesting combination of genres and good art from I believe Jonathan Moore. And on a totally different page, he did like Captain Ultimate, which is this all ages, like golden age, silver age, fun superhero book. Really cool art, really vibrant, colorful, which is the exact opposite of what Footprints looks like. And then Pawn Shop is really good, and that's I think out now, the full graphic novel. And it's kind of morose and sad slice of life story, but it's inspiring at the same time. So these are all different things, and I talked with Joey about why he does all these different things, and if he's made a conscious effort to not stick to one thing. So he has diverse stuff, and he has more diverse stuff in the works, or so he's told me. So look forward to that, and I hope you enjoy the episode. I'll see you on the other side. So what are you working on right now?
Right now I have like 5 different pitches creator-owned pitches that I'm kind of shopping around and finishing up and that sort of stuff. In addition to working on a TV pilot with my friend, and working on a novel, sort of. That's sort of like on the back burner, and then once the year finishes up and I sort of finish all the pitches and all that kind of stuff, early next year is going to be focused on just the novel. So
That sounds like a busy collection of things going on, though.
yeah, I I try. And Pawn Shop comes out next week, so it's going to be a lot of like signing and going around to shops and New York Comic Con and all that stuff. So
right.
Pretty busy. It's good.
Wait, what'd you say comes out next week?
Pawn Shop.
Oh, Pawn Shop. Yeah. Gotcha. I read the first issue. I didn't get the time to read all of them,
thanks,
but
man. Well, now
the
whole graphic novel comes out next week, so there you go.
Nice. Yeah, Pawn Shop was interesting. I guess because I read all of Footprints,
Mm-hmm.
and I checked out pieces, of, like I said, of Pawn Shop and Cats and Ultimate. They're all very different things.
Yeah.
I guess it's like slice of life, superhero, golden age superhero stuff, and then like a detective noir story. Is that was that like a concerted effort on your part to do something different with all those different things?
I don't know if I did it like consciously. I think it's just by nature of who I am. I just want to do all those things. Like I definitely don't want to be the guy that only writes one particular type of story, or I guess I should say in one genre, because I don't know, that just sounds like an awful existence to me. Like the idea of being typecast is one thing, and I think none of my books have been such a huge success or anything. So if that happens, I do wonder, like, whichever one hits, if any of them ever do, like, am I going to be stuck doing that forever? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
no,
you see
that's a
people
legitimate fear.
yeah,
Of
like
success
I guess
in
it's
general.
the equivalent of being typecast.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I guess I'm not a supreme expert in the comics world, but
sure.
I imagine that happens to writers all the time, especially connected to a specific character, even or something
Yeah,
like
I
that.
think in comics, and like if you're a big superhero comics guy, I think that having a connection to a character that is integral to your career, but ultimately, like, that's something you never shake. A friend of mine, Ron Mars, actually writes a column. I mean, he's a comic book writer. He's an awesome dude. But back in the '90s, he's sort of the one that ushered in Kyle Rayner and Green Lantern and that whole thing. And he wrote a really interesting post. He does like this guest column on CBR. I don't remember what column it was in, but it stuck with me. It was just that, like, he has accepted the fact that no matter what he does, no matter how great his later work is, he's always going to have, in parentheses, Green Lantern after his name, because that's sort of his first big break, and that's the thing that a lot of people remember him for.
Right, and hopefully that thing is something that you're proud of, that that you're not regretting that it's in parentheses. Which,
yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's a big thing to be. Green Lantern's not like, I'm sure he's glad of his or happy with his work on
Oh
Green
yeah,
Lantern.
totally. It's like,
But it can be a double-edged sword. I see what you're saying there, because
right,
people will kind of boil you down to that.
right. Thankfully, I only have one book that I've done that I just wish never happened, and and can just
What was
fade
that?
into obscurity as far as I'm concerned. I got hired to write a book for Zenescope called Grim Fairy Tales Batgirls. So
Oh, okay. I saw that in your, I guess, on the Comixology page, but I didn't.
yeah, like if you click on
look
my
into
creator profile, it comes up, which sucks.
it. Why don't you want to be linked with that?
It's garbage. It's utter garbage, and I hate it. And
You mean you just aren't proud with your work, or what they wanted you to do with it? Like
both. I mean, it was definitely a case where, like, they handed me an outline and were like, "This is what the story is.
Got it.
Go for it." And if you look at the issue, it's like story by 3 people and then written by Joey Esposito. So, like, to some degree, I feel like I'm not totally accountable, because I had very, very strict sort of parameters to be in. At the same time, it's your job as a writer in a case like that to, like, elevate the storyline or elevate the characters as far as you can. And I don't know that I did that very much. And plus, it's just I don't love the art, and it's just a piece of shit. So. So, like,
I don't think I've ever heard anyone get so down on something they've done, but I mean, that's fine. I mean, there's probably people that feel that way, but just would never say that. But we don't have to dwell on it too much, since you clearly don't like it. But what's the premise of it? Like, and I guess the art is kind of comic book art.
I mean, so the thing with Zenescope is they are sort of notorious for their cheesecake covers. Lots of cleavage and stuff like that, which, people like that. That's fine. It's not I love pinup girls and stuff like that, but cheesecake comics just were never my thing. But the thing with them is that they have these really great characters and this really in-depth, awesome mythology. And it's just people get hung up on the cover things, which to a point where I'm not even sure that they should do them because it's really distracting from the story, but that's neither here nor there. And it's not that I don't like a lot of their comics. It's just that the book that they had envisioned. First of all, my first editorial note was like, put in a caption here because this is going to take place after the main series issue 90 or something. Keep in mind that my first issue came out like when issue 85 or something was on the stand. So there's this editorial note that this whole story you're about to read takes place after an issue of the main series that won't be out for another 5 months. Right. So like that scheduling thing was weird, which okay, whatever. Like the fans of the series can suss it out, I'm sure.
Right.
But it was just really not interesting. It's a very basic good versus evil story, and there's some good character stuff, or at least that I thought was cool that I did with some of the characters that was just totally irrelevant in terms of the rest of the story they were doing, to the point where like they probably should have said, hey, you can't do that because this is what we're doing with that character elsewhere. So, I mean, and that's another thing that I guess you have to deal with if you're working within the confines of like an established universe, because you are sort of beholden to what else is going on in the more important books, you know?
Right. I guess I'm kind of ignorant of, like I said, of some of the inner workings like that of comic stuff, but I imagine that's how people feel within Marvel and DC stuff too.
Yeah, I mean,
like a higher level of that even.
Yeah, and I think Marvel and DC and places like that have the system figured out, whereas Zenescope didn't necessarily like have an efficient editorial system in place. You know, and I'm not worried about like I don't want to work there again, so I have no qualms about talking bluntly. And I think it's something that people don't do enough in comics, like talk about their experiences. It's just, at the time they offered it to me, and I was like, well, this is one of my, my first major sort of paying job. So I guess I should just do it just to get my name out there and add some work to my catalog or whatever, which in retrospect was an awful idea. So there was a red flag that I should have picked out right away, because I got an email on like the 17th, and they were like, hey, do you want to do this? I was like, yeah, sure, that's great. Okay, we need the issue number 1 script by the 20th. And I was like, okay, so you mean the 20th of next month, right? And it was basically, nope, we mean Monday. So I had a 22-page script to do in a weekend, more or less. And that's just insane, And so that's how the deadlines were the whole time. Lots of like waiting to get me stuff at the last minute, and I never saw art until it was, the book was on the shelf and things like that, and it just wasn't very organized. So I don't know. I feel like there's definitely a way to manage a shared universe like that, and Marvel and DC and Valiant do it just fine. It's because their editorial staff is on point and fantastic. So this is just a small company and lots of disorganization, and it was just a miserable experience all around. So, So in addition to it being garbage and just not having any good memories of the experience, I would like to never see. I don't even have like a copy of the books.
Right.
I save copies of everything, but I sold them all at conventions. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'll make money off of them. But
there you go.
But once they were gone, like I didn't want to restock them or anything. It's just not something that I'm proud of. So.
All right. Well, all right. So let's kind of, I guess, trace it back a little bit, because the point of this podcast is just kind of where everything started and how you got to where you are. So where are you from, and like kind of what your parents do? What kind of informed you to get into comics and stuff like that?
I'm from a town called Pittsfield, Massachusetts, in the Berkshires, the Berkshire County, which is, a lot of city folks come up here to see the foliage and stuff like that. It's kind of known for being that sort of town. And growing up here it's a shithole. Like Berkshire County itself is nice, but Pittsfield was sort of like GE World Headquarters was here for a long time, and then when I was little, they left, and like a huge number of people lost their jobs. Like it's sort of like, did you ever see Roger and Me, the Michael Moore's first movie? It's about his hometown, and
No, but I imagine it's kind of a situation where like the town was built around. Here's something I can tie it to: Tommy Boy.
yeah,
The factory. That's something that is a little more in my wheelhouse. But
yeah,
yeah, it leaves and then it kind of ruins kind of the whole town's economy and everything.
right. So that's lots of families that we knew were laid off and that sort of thing. And I feel like since that point, and plus GE while they were here polluted like crazy. Like they found PCBs everywhere long after they left, and they had to dig up like elementary schools and things like that. Like it's a pretty messed up place. But the Berkshires in general are pretty nice, and Pittsfield is much better now. It's really come a long way since I was a kid, but it's definitely one of those places growing up where you're like, I can't wait to get the hell out of here. There's nothing for me here, and there still isn't job wise. Like if I wanted to have a career here, forget it, but being able to freelance and things like that from a place like this is a different story. But for people that are here, like trying to have a job outside of like the medical industry or, that's it really. Like healthcare is pretty much all there is around here, and retail.
I was just gonna say retail and
sort of
jobs.
Yeah, exactly. Like the things that most communities would have.
Right, but not like careers necessarily.
Yeah, and I mean there is like Sabic Plastics here now, so like there's a branch here. General Dynamics has a branch here, so like engineering and stuff, there's definitely opportunities. But I guess what I'm saying is if you were an artsy kid, then forget it. You had to get out, and so that's what I ended up doing. But my parents were, well, my dad was a carpenter, and he's retired now, but still works all the time, of course, as retired people that work their whole lives tend to do. It's like hard to stop, I think, and still have to pay the bills. And my mom was just she was a homemaker. She used to work at a pharmacy when I was a little kid, and I remember like going and hanging out there with her because my dad used to work hours away. He would sometimes have to be in New Jersey or somewhere crazy, and he would drive back and forth every day. When he would get up at like 3:30, 4 in the morning, and leave and get home at 9 o'clock at night.
Wow.
So I remember like hanging out in the store with her until he came home and to pick me up and go home or whatever. But I mean, childhood was fine. It wasn't
as it often is.
Yeah, it was.
Most people, it's just fine.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, my parents always encouraged me to be creative, and all my sisters encouraged me to be creative, and my dad plays the guitar, so that started, like, music was a part of my life at a very early age, learning guitar, and my brother-in-law at the time was a drummer in like a jazz band, and he would show me stuff. So that, I think, musically was sort of my real gateway into doing artsy things, if that makes sense.
No, definitely.
Lots of dancing in the living room. My sisters used to make me call the radio station and request songs for them, thinking that because I was a little kid, it would be adorable and it was more likely to get played.
Right. So your sisters were older.
Yeah,
so they would use you as the little kid.
Basically, I mean, I never felt like I was being used. Like, they were very good to me, and I was very spoiled. I was the baby. I have 4 older sisters and 2 brothers that are also older. So it's like
big family. It's
a big family. It's sort of like a Brady Bunch family. Both my parents had previous marriages, and
gotcha. Like,
I'm the only kid that they had together, really, and then everyone else is like a half sibling, I guess. But I just never really thought of it that way.
I was gonna say, but it doesn't sound like you guys had a situation where that was a problem or something that was.
No, I mean, there's definitely some siblings that I'm not close to, but then there's others that I'm very close to.
I think that's just statistically what happens when there's 7 people involved,
exactly. And some of them, like the ones from my dad's side were they grew up in Connecticut, so like they were never really in close proximity, except for
Gotcha.
like when we would visit on holidays or something. And my other sisters lived in the house, so it's like I think just by nature of our living situation, I was bound to be closer to some rather than others. But we also keep in touch, and the sisters that I live back in Pittsfield now, and I hang out with my sisters every Friday night, so we're close.
Good.
Yeah.
What was the first, I guess, comic book you picked up? Was you said music was your first kind of artsy introduction, but was comic books the next thing, or did that still take a while
I
to
mean,
get into?
my mom was very encouraging in terms of like reading and stuff, and both my parents read comics as when they were kids, and so like it was always sort of a thing, and I think it probably started with like Superman the movie and things like that,
Right.
the movies and Batman '89 and stuff like that. But the first book I remember buying or picking out myself was Adventures of Superman number 450 from a spinner rack at a Walden Books in the mall. And I know I definitely had comics before that, but that's the first one that I remember like seeing the cover in the store and like being told I could pick out a comic, and that's the one that I went with. But my parents were both readers, and my mom always told a story of like she used to collect super family books in the Silver Age in the 50s. So it's like Superman and Supergirl and Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane and Superman's pal Jim Nielsen and all those books. And she had them in their basement or whatever. And when she moved out, my grandfather threw them all away.
Oh, that sucks.
So like I grew up sort of with the benefit of being a collector and knowing that my parents wouldn't toss my shit, since
Yeah.
they'd sort of had it done to them, and so which for better or worse has worked out. Like I have lots of stuff, but I have probably too much stuff and stuff that I definitely do not need. But yeah, so Adventures of Superman 450. It was like the Invasion Aftermath. It's like right before he gets exiled into space, I believe.
What year was this?
This is like 1989, I think,
Okay.
1988.
I'm not very familiar with my Superman lore, but that helps me place it a little bit.
Yeah. So it was just so cool. And Gangbuster was in it, who I love to this day. And it just had a really
weird
cool
ones I know
cover.
about.
It was like he's flying away from the Daily Planet and like that's in rubble. And it was such a, even at 4 or 5 or whatever, it was just such a cool, striking image. And I've been obsessed with Superman since the womb. So it's like, of course, that was my first pick. And then I think very closely after was Batman 412, I want to say. It's an issue. It's actually really, can I swear on this?
Of course, yeah.
It's a really fucked up issue, and I just reread it like a couple months ago, and I couldn't believe that this was one of the books I had when I was a kid, but it's about like Batman dealing with a sniper that's just like on a rooftop and picking off not like random people, which is like a terrifying thing and something that we deal with in real life, and it's just...
I want to say I've read that one, but I mean, I don't know, because there's just so much Batman stuff that I've been bombarded with. But
yeah.
that premise sounds similar to something I've seen.
It's a really good issue, and I think it's also an issue where Batman is dealing with the death of Jason Todd. So it's like extra dark because Batman's like just like on the edge and about to lose it, and there's a moment where like Gordon is trying to talk to him and he just says nothing and just grapples away and just like sort of like focused all his energy on getting this sniper taken care of, It's a really crazy issue. So, I don't know, that might explain some things about how I turned out.
Well, yeah, but it sounds like you had the two kind of, because you wrote Captain Ultimate, which is very Golden Age, do good superhero.
That's true.
That's your Superman. And then you got your Batman, things are fucked up, but it's still not like just gross for the sake of being gross or something. It's just like kind of mature in a word, and that informs some of your other stuff, but it's good that there's that balance at least. But
yeah, I guess you're right. I never thought about it that way.
But so, what were some of your other things that were going on? Because, like I said, Footprints seems very noir influenced. And so did you pull stuff from like a bunch of TV shows? Were there other like nerdy things that you got into as a kid that, influenced a lot of stuff you wrote later outside of comics?
I was definitely, I was a huge Star Wars nerd, like gigantic. I remember my dad showing them to me unless they were on TV or something. And one of my first memories of Star Wars is a TIE fighter getting blown up, and I was just like, that was it. And then, a few years later would be the special edition releases in 96, 97 when I was like 11 or 12. And so like it was perfect timing because I loved Star Wars, but then being able to be a part of it in a way that, it kind of a generation hadn't really, because you had the first generation, I guess. Oh no, I guess that was the next generation, right? That would be my group of people, like born in 85. So it's like the people that saw Star Wars were then taking their kids to see it, and I guess I would fall into that category.
Yeah, because you saw it like after the fact. You never really saw them as they were in full swing.
Right, exactly. So that was huge. But I played a lot of sports as a kid. I played soccer, I played baseball, did karate for a little while. I played outside a lot. I of course played tons of video games too, but I was very like active in a way that surprises me now. Because like I just it's like a different kid, I think it was, high school is where everything changes, as it so often does for everyone.
Yes. Yeah, you take your path there. You're going to be that's kind of how it was for me too. I was super into nerdy stuff, video games, whatever, and then middle school even. It's like I started to stay inside more and more, and then you kind of get this idea that it's like not as cool to play outside, but you're not on this level that you're like going to do professional sports, so you kind of just, at least this is my situation.
I think that's what it is. I think it's the competitiveness of it.
Yeah, because that starts to get into full swing once you get into high school and everything.
Yeah.
You can't just play anymore because that's weird.
Exactly. And like baseball I was always pretty good at, all-star team and all that kind of stuff. But like, I think what happened there was I played soccer my freshman year of high school, like JV soccer, and I just fucking hated all of those kids. You know what I mean? I just fucking hated them, and I just didn't want to do it. And I don't like soccer I wasn't good really. I was fine, but it wasn't like I was going to be an all-star at the sport. I was going to be David Beckham or something.
Right.
And it was just like miserable experience on that team, and that's a fall sport. And then spring rolled around, and I was like, I don't want to play baseball here, and so that was sort of it. And I just started working instead. I started working when I was 14 at a local grocery store, bagging groceries and getting carts, and I just rather spend my after school time that way and make money to buy video games and hang out,
Right.
And I was playing a lot of music in high school. I had a band, played the ninth grade talent show and stuff like that. So after 8th grade, I became like one of those kids, one of the weird kids.
Yeah, but those are always the kids that end up being the coolest. As they say.
Maybe.
It gets better, as they always say to them.
Yeah, high school definitely sucked, but it did get better.
Yeah, I think you find this is generally covered, but if you find the people that say high school was awesome, there's something going on there that maybe isn't the best. That like their perception is skewed. Because I didn't hate high school, but it also wasn't like I wasn't the coolest kid. I wasn't even necessarily a cool kid, but it was fine.
Yeah,
I think
that's
the bully dynamic doesn't actually happen as much anymore. At least when because I'm 19, so like it. I think it's.
Oh, so you're fresh out of it.
Yeah, I graduated a couple of years ago. Yeah, I graduated when I was 17, but I think it's like totally changed now, especially with the nerdy thing. I had a YouTube channel and like no one cared. Whereas like I feel like if you had something like that, some nerdy thing like that, you'd get picked on a lot. But
yeah,
things are just diversified.
It's definitely like a different world now. But although like. So it's weird for me because in 8th grade, like I was very much friends with all of the kids that would go on to be like the quote unquote popular kids in high school, and so like they all knew me and it was fine. But it's just like you just start having different interests in things, and then by ninth grade I was just separate from them, but like still on fine terms. It wasn't like I got picked on or anything like that.
Right.
It was just like I wasn't into hanging out and partying and just being part of that group. You know what I mean? We used to do like a video game night every Friday at my best friend's house, and we would just like stay over there and hang out in his basement all weekend, and it was fine. It was great. And it's just like other stuff never really interested me, I guess. But I also, in high school, I was so it was like a vocational technical high school. So there was like the college prep kids, which was, all of the, I guess, okay, so a good way to think of it is like there's the vocational kids and there's the college prep kids. And I was this weird in-between where I was like vocational technical because I was in a computer network management program, which is like basically a college-level course to go and be an IT person. The idea being that you could graduate with like your A+ certification and all that stuff when you're a senior in high school and not have to go to college. Although, they encouraged it, obviously. But the other vocational programs were like the auto body and carpentry and that sort of stuff. So like for half the day, every day, I was in this networking class with a bunch of other nerds, So it was like this weird in-between of like being a vocational kid but being a super nerdy vocational kid, which was fine. And, I have great memories of that class. And it did not work out, obviously. I did not pursue the IT arts.
Right.
Which I'm like, I stayed in the program all through high school, but it starts sophomore year, and then my junior year, which is 2001, our teacher like left for some other job, and then they never were able to replace him. Like, so we had lots of, like, the auto body guy taught for a while.
Oh my god.
And, like, they just rotated teachers until we found one at the end of, like, junior year into senior year. But at that point, we were just like, well, fuck this. This is dumb. And all we did was we played Quake 2 a lot. We downloaded the emulators and played, I beat A Link to the Past in that class, and it was just, like, in retrospect, I totally wasted my time. But, at the time, it was like, well, yeah, fuck this. Like, they screwed me. I'm not going to do this in college, so what's the point?
Maybe you didn't waste time, though, because ultimately, if you had stayed in there, then you would have gone into the IT arts, as you said, and
maybe,
you would have felt like you wasted time there. So it all balanced out.
And I remember going to my guidance counselor and being like, so I want to go to film school. And they're like, oh, okay. And so that, like, changed everything. And, like, once I made that decision, which was, like, early on, it was probably like the summer of before senior year, I think. And it surprised everyone in my class, but like it didn't at the same time, because it was just, and we had done like internships. I had an internship in the IT department at a local insurance company. And when going on a call there, I was like, yeah, fuck this. I do not want to do this. I don't want to go tell people to plug their keyboards in, So.
Right.
I'm glad that it shook out how it did, because I could have had a very different path, and I think ultimately I probably would have wound up where I am. It just would have been a much more roundabout way.
Yeah. So you ended up going to film school then?
I did.
And what was the driver behind that? And then how did that shake out? Did you finish through? Because I know the stories always of people going, especially to film school, and then just don't even
and then
finish.
dropping out. Yeah, no, I did finish. So I have my bachelor's of fine arts in film, which is useless and great. But I think I was really, I loved Star Wars, and I loved George Lucas, and just knowing his path. And I regardless of what people think of, I love the prequels personally.
I was just going to bring this up because I follow you on Twitter, so I often see your your comments on the prequels, and I'm a defender of the prequels as well. So you're
I can acknowledge that they're certainly not perfect,
Right.
But I think they're a lot of fun, and there's definitely awesome stuff to them, and I love that aspect of Lucas's vision of like these are my movies, and I'm going to do what I want to them, because it's my vision and it's my piece of work, and he didn't compromise to that sort of notion of fan ownership, which is a very strange problem that I feel like has only been exacerbated with time. And you see that with how like the success of these sort of genre movies that have taken over, and just comics in general. There's definitely a sense of fan ownership. Like, how could you do this to my favorite character? You know what I mean? Where it's like, well, you're sort of along for the ride, and it's really the vision of the creators. And so sort of that mentality of Lucas I really was drawn to. And the movies of Wes Anderson and things like that. I had this very interesting take on movies where you could have these big budget Star Wars things, but I also love the idea of these low budget independent movies. I mean, Kevin Smith at the time, he hadn't had his career in the 2000s yet. So it was like, at that time it was Clerks and Mallrats and Chasing Amy and Dogma, and those were like kind of a revelation to me, like especially Clerks, because
Clerks is so good.
It's really, it holds up. It's fantastic. And like,
I watched it the first time like 2 years ago, and I thought it was great.
Yeah, so, it's really clever, and it's really simple. And those ideas of like that you can do something so out there and crazy and epic as Star Wars, but also like just something so simple and still have a career doing that was attractive to me. And so like part of me wanted to go to film school because I didn't know which route to take.
What medium could get you to do that?
Yeah, exactly. Which ultimately ended up being comics, because comics you can do whatever the fuck you want, and you don't have to worry about budgets except for paying your artists,
Right.
And so, again, in a class at film school about comics and making comics and stuff is sort of what led me to realize that was probably the path I wanted to take.
So out of film school, where'd you go? What were, I guess, instead of the not big break, but the small break, like what kind of got you going? Because I know you worked at IGN covering comics for a while. Was that the closest you got to comics for the first time?
No, I mean, obviously I grew up reading comics, and I'd always worked and read comics, like always going to the shops on Wednesdays and stuff like that. But I went to a school called CW Post, which is part of Long Island University. So it's like down near New York City, but not in the city. So you're on Long Island, and it's a 45-minute train ride into the city or whatever. So you still had the access of being in New York, but not actually being in the city, which worked out well for me. Plus, my mom was from Brooklyn, and I have a whole bunch of family on Long Island and around that area. So that was sort of like, and it was close enough to home where I could come home if I wanted to for the weekend, and it's like 3 hours or so. So that made the most sense to me. I definitely also didn't take advantage of everything there.
In New York or
in both
area in general?
Both. In the grand scheme of things in New York, but definitely in my time at school, which like, I mean, don't get me wrong. I had a good time. Again, I wasn't a party monster or anything like that. I just kind of hung out. And then one of my best friends, who was a year behind me, so he was a freshman in college when I was a sophomore. He ended up coming there and being my roommate. So like, it was, and he was one of the people that would come to the video game nights all the time. So it was really just sort of like a recreation of that environment, which was great. And I honestly don't think I would have made it through college without him there. Not to speak ill of my college friends that I had made. My randomly assigned roommate in freshman year ended up being a really good friend. But it was just having that sense of home, I guess, was really important. But yeah, so I mean, I went, and it wasn't the kind of film school where you have to like pick a concentration, so you didn't have to be just screenwriting or just directing or whatever. You sort of got an eclectic mix of everything. So you had directing classes, you had cinematography classes, you had screenwriting classes, you had film theory classes and editing classes and all that stuff. So it was a nice sort of robust curriculum, I guess. But I definitely found myself drawn most to the writing portions and doing the best in the writing portions and the most engaged, you know. And so then there was a course called I don't remember what it was called, but it was the first semester was basically like analyzing graphic novels and talking about them and writing papers on them and stuff. It was like a
fun class.
Yeah, it was like a literature course. And then the second semester of that was making comics. So it was like learning the rules of cartooning and studying Scott McCloud's books and making your own mini comics as your final and stuff like that. Taught by Dr. Isaac Cates, who's great. And so that was when I was like, wow, you can, like, I'd always loved comics and read them, and I used to like trace Dan Jurgens' art in the Death of Superman days and like that sort of thing, but I never really thought about applying all the stories that I wanted to do as comics, you know, and taking like these screenplay ideas or cool movie ideas and making them work as comics instead, because like I mentioned, you know, your budget is only the page rate of the artist and printing costs. You don't have to worry about special effects and all that stuff. And so that was really huge for me. And that sort of, I know I made my shitty thesis film and stuff, but like, and I graduated and got my degree, but it was always, okay, how do I get into comics? Like, how does that industry work? Like, I knew how movies worked and TV and stuff because they teach you that at film school, but comics is like completely foreign to me, and I don't know that I've figured it out yet. But I'm working on it.
So yeah, what was that first job pertaining to that you got out of school? Did it take a while, or was it relatively?
Yeah, I mean, I graduated school and I was working at Starbucks on Long Island, which is still probably my favorite job that I've ever had. I loved working at Starbucks. I mean, I don't know that I loved it at the time, but it was like definitely, looking back, one of the best times I've ever had. It was one of the best jobs I've ever had and one of the worst times of my life, I'll put it that way. So like, you know, you've gone to school, you are going to you get your first student loan bill that's like, you'll be paid off in 2035, and you're paying $500 a month, you know what I mean? And then you're working at goddamn Starbucks.
Yeah.
It's like, what the fuck did I do this for? Like, and then of course reading like Quentin Tarantino interviews where he's like, you shouldn't go to film school, just take that money and make your first movie. And I was like, fuck, why didn't I read this before? You know? And it's just like, and I do somewhat regret going to college, because it's just, for this sort of career, I'm not sure that it really did much for me other than, I guess, course correct me, you know, but that's like a $100,000-something course correction.
Right.
You know what I mean? So,
yeah.
So I definitely wasn't thrilled, but at that time, I think like a lot of people that don't really know how to get into making comics just started writing about comics. So must have been 2006 probably. I started writing online, just blogs and stuff, and you know, I'd done it before with movies, but I just started writing about comics, and then found this new upstart site called CC2K, who didn't have a whole lot of comics coverage, but it was definitely like in that wheelhouse, and they let me build up their comic section. And so I did that, you know, got writers and started doing weekly reviews. And it's funny, actually, in like 2007, I applied to IGN for like a freelance position, and the editor before me, well, the editor that had the comic section before I actually worked there, and the guy who I eventually replaced, he had like a whole like giant process of like hiring freelancers, and I made it to like the last round. It was like the Hunger Games of writing about comics. It was fucking ridiculous.
Who was that?
Rich George.
Yeah. Okay.
He works at Nintendo now.
Yeah.
But he was the comics guy for many years.
Yeah.
And so like I had applied through him and didn't get the job, and so I was doing the CC2K stuff, and that was fine. That, you know, it was definitely like the non-paying grunt work. But it was exciting at the time. Like, I'm writing about comics. I get free passes to comic shows. I get free books sometimes, you know?
Yeah.
So that was cool. And then eventually, one of the guys that, well, one of my best friends, Eric Norris, and he was writing at CC2K with me. He eventually got work doing some video game stuff at a site called Crave Online, who's like the parent, the parent site of, you know, Superhero Hype and Shock Till You Drop and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so then eventually I started writing there about comics, and then their comic guy left, and I just sort of fell into that position of being their comics editor, which was still freelance, but they paid well, and it was definitely more high profile, and I got better access and better opportunities in terms of like people to talk to and review books, and that's when I sort of like got, you know, on the real press list where I was getting comps all the time and really getting to like dig in and cover stuff that it just opened a lot of doors in that way, and meeting creators and, you know, sort of starting those relationships that can be weird sometimes when you're a journalist and then you sort of become friends with the creators, you know?
Right.
And then I did that for like 2 years, and then there was the opening at IGN, and I applied and I got it, and moved to California, and was miserable.
Mm-hmm. Were you in LA?
I was in LA. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that probably didn't help.
Yeah. So
you were in that part of California.
So, and I mean, I loved, and even like the job itself, I think even by, like, it was definitely exciting working at IGN. I mean, IGN was a site that I had read since it was N64.com, and I was trying to find the goddamn non-existent Triforce and Ocarina of Time, you know? And they've been my homepage for well over a decade at that point. Like, I loved IGN. And so working there was exciting. Everyone that I worked with there was great. I loved the editorial team. But I was just really not happy in LA. And it sort of got to this point where I was like, right at the end of my stint at Crave, so this was like 2010, I had done the first issue of Footprints. And
what year was this?
This was 2010.
Okay.
So like my first real, I guess I should say this, is that my first real like attempt at making a comic was in early 2010, and I don't know if you remember Zuda Comics, which was this, well, like, it was much, like, it was too far ahead of its time, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It was this thing that DC had done that was sort of like a webcomic competition.
Mm-hmm.
So the comics themselves were laid out like Sunday strips, basically. Like, they weren't regular comics pages. They were sort of like half that size. And they were, every few months there would be 10 new comics that would go up, and readers would vote. And then the winner would get an ongoing contract with like a trade deal. And so books like High Moon was one of the winners. And, you know, that was just really exciting and really innovative at the time.
Cool premise. Cool.
Yeah, it was awesome. And it was just, it was like the first real like mainstream acknowledgement. Oh, not the first, because there was also like MySpace comics and stuff before that, but it was definitely one of the first of the big two to like do something cool like that. Right. And so in early 2010, Jonathan Moore and I started working on a pitch for Zuda Comics. Jonathan would be the one to go on, would be my co-creator on Footprints after the fact. Right. But at this time it was a totally different thing. And we were like in the middle of working on it, and DC announced that they were shuttering Zuda and Wildstorm. And so we were like, oh, well, shit, I guess we can't do this for Zuda anymore, so let's just make this a regular comics pitch, which, I mean, to begin with, it was a stupid idea. What
was the idea?
It was called Roscoe and Alice Find God, and the premise was based on, this is super dark. So it was this really grim pitch that ended with like, it was this scene in a school gymnasium with two little kids, and this one of them being Roscoe, the title character, and they're singing, you know, the Hawaiian Christmas song, whatever it's called. and this crazy woman comes in, and the cops end up coming and blowing her brains out like all over him. And it was just like it was super gruesome and not very good. I still like the idea. I think that we were like trying to get at, I think, was with celebrity and that sort of thing. But I just don't think that I was equipped to handle that at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so that got done and lettered and stuff, and it just exists. Like it was never.
On a hard drive somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I never pitched it anywhere ever. Like it was just never fully realized, which I'm glad for. So I don't think it would have been good had we continued further. I'm not even sure like I had a plan beyond like issue 1, you know. So
right.
I feel like I got a lot of stupid mistakes out on that.
Yeah, no, that helps.
Yeah. So and then so later that year we started working on Footprints, and that worked out well.
Yeah. So what year did you leave IGN, and was the decision to do that to go to writing and pitching and doing whatever full time and to get out of California?
Yeah, I mean, I think the primary motivating factor was to get out of California, which I now regret to some degree, and I think that's just more of a personal shortcoming that I have, is that I just don't. I can't settle in anywhere and be happy like in any place I've ever lived, which is a problem that I need to work on.
Yeah, it sounds like a big problem.
Yeah, so it's like wherever I go, it's always grass is greener on the other side or whatever. Or like I'll be happy for a few months at a place and then be like, well, this sucks now, and I just want to be like a beach bum and a vagabond that just wanders, you know.
Yeah, I don't think that's like it's not an uncommon feeling necessarily either. I mean, I feel like that's, especially in this kind of, if you want to just call it like the artsy industries or whatever, I think that's normal.
Yeah, you're probably right. My problem being that I have a fuck ton of comics that I have to lug everywhere every time I move, you know?
Right,
which is a huge pain. So that was a motivating factor. Like I was just super lonely out in LA, and all my friends live on the East Coast. All my family lives on the East Coast. And like, while I had certainly made friends in LA and loved the people I work with, it was just like, there's just something missing there. And so, in addition to, at the time I had a positive meeting with an editor at one of the big two that I thought would pan out well, that ultimately nothing came of, which, was my own naivety, I guess, of like, things are going to be great. I can go live cheaply in my hometown, and I should get this comics gig and it'll be fine.
Yep.
But that didn't work out.
Yeah, I've had a few of those thoughts as well.
Yeah. So like, all those things sort of combined, and plus just really burnt out on covering comics as like a journalist.
Right.
And it was just getting to this weird point of like, getting like, at that point Captain Ultimate had happened, and that was cool. I had done the Zenoscope book that I talked about and some other work for hire things, but like it was getting to a point where I felt like I was ready to move forward in comics, as a career, and like the conflict of interest with being covering it as press and
right.
Which I still agree with, but now I see people that do both, and I'm just like, well, fuck, why did I do that? I should have stayed at that awesome job and, and not have gone totally destitute and broke by being unemployed and doing freelance stuff, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, like, that's kind of a bummer to see, and I still agree with that they should be separate, or, like, even if you write for, like, an outlet, a media outlet, just maybe don't cover comics if you're writing comics, you know what I mean? Or TV if you're writing TV about TV. Just that kind of thing.
No, I totally understand that, because I'm in journalism school right now, and that's something that I'm taking an ethics class, and it's like some of it I'm looking at, I'm like, the people joke about video game journalism ethics and entertainment ethics, but it really isn't at all what I'm being taught. It's very, very loose compared to what I'm being taught.
Yeah.
And I think I'm synthesizing both modes. There's two extremes to that, but you're right though. I think that's a very valid concern though, and it was cool of you, I guess, to have that thought and to like kind of get out of it because you're thinking that way. Because I think that is a viable opinion.
Yeah, and
I don't necessarily agree with a lot of the hard and set ethics that I'm learning, but that's definitely an aspect of it.
And I'm always hesitant to ever call myself a journalist or to say comic book journalism because there's very,
Right.
very little of that. I think there's plenty of comic book criticism or video game criticism, but I sort of use journalist as a shorthand so I don't have to say I used to write about comics.
Yeah, someone that writes about,
Right.
You just say journalist because, I understand that.
Because it's easier. So, like, I'll say that, but it's not. I've never really thought of myself as a journalist or even, like, most of my peers as journalists. There are certainly exceptions.
Yeah.
But I would rather call it,
Totally.
a critic or pop culture enthusiast or something.
That's why I'm in this track, right? And I feel like kind of isolated from a lot of my other peers because they want to be journalists, and I'm like, I couldn't do that. We're covering like courts and crap. I'm like, I can't even. I'd probably lose it if I had to like cover local news or something like that, and everyone else seems fine with it. So it's like, journalists is, you're right. This is the closest major I could get to what I want to do. And the journalist, using the word, is the closest you can get to describing that I wrote about this entertainment thing.
Right. But I do think there's certainly space for the real ethics of journalism to make its way into comics and into entertainment in general.
Yeah.
And I think that's a beneficial background to have. And a lot of people that are editors at major sites or wherever don't really have the background in journalism. Which again is fine. I don't have the background in journalism, and I was a senior editor at one of the biggest websites in the world. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's awesome. But I also don't think that we can not have that background and still call ourselves journalists. At least I don't feel comfortable doing that. So, but that being said, like, if you do land in that position without that background, I think it's important and respectful to the art of journalism that you at least get a handle on what is expected of you.
And I think most people do.
Yeah.
Because like I said, I hate the whole like debate or whatever you want to call it over video game ethics or whatever, the entertainment ethics journalism. But
I mean, I can tell you I've certainly never seen anyone like give a good review because they buy ads.
Yeah, that's what I mean, is that I know that's not going on. There's other stuff that there is a kind of a finer line that people don't consider. But,
yeah, for sure. And and that's sort of why I just left. And rather than like try and sort that out, and whether or not it was the right decision, I don't know. Like I do definitely miss not so much covering comics. Like if I could work at a site like IGN or one of those big entertainment sites covering something else, I think I probably would. But it's just the grind of covering comics, especially when it's something that I knew I wanted to work in creatively. Like doing it from another angle is just just a grind, man. And
because that would be like someone that wants to be a video game developer covering video games, or someone that wants to be a filmmaker covering films. I imagine that would be kind of stifling.
Yeah, it's stifling. Like you definitely, I think there's the people that are creative in those industries are always going to want to like write about them, but not as a job. You know what I mean? Like you see like Quentin Tarantino writing about movies, it's because he loves movies, and it's not because he's covering a beat.
I was going to say, but he's not a movie beat reporter,
right?
Which there's a big difference between those worlds. Yeah,
exactly. And like I felt that covering comics in that way was really like damaging my love and appreciation of the medium, which is not somewhere you want to be with anything.
No.
And so that's why that happened,
So so you got Footprints going, and would you say that's like that was your first kind of push, or did you do the aforementioned comic that you love before that? Like what was the timeline on that versus Captain Ultimate and then Pawn Shop and all the stuff? Like what came?
Footprints was definitely like my first. I would consider my first comic.
Got it.
so we made issue 1, on our own, and then kickstarted the rest of it, which was like, this is early 2011, so Kickstarter wasn't like a thing that was predominantly used. It's certainly not like it was today. So that, we did that, and then we found a publisher called 215 Inc., which is a small press, Philadelphia-based publisher that wanted to do the series, which was also kind of like a disaster experience. I guess maybe my expectations were not at the appropriate level. Not in terms of sales and stuff, but just in terms of the amount of... I don't think I appreciated the amount of hustling that I was going to have to do on my own. Like, it was... Other than, like, handling the printing and putting their logo on the book, there wasn't a whole lot that they did for us that...
In terms of, like, pushing the book and promoting it.
Yeah, like, their reach was very small. And to be frank, like, with my newfound sort of... I'm using celebrity, but that's not, you know what I mean? Just
I know what you mean.
My role at IGN, where I'm like more in
personality.
Right. So like, Twitter followers or whatever the fuck, like whatever that's worth. But like, I felt like I was able to do just as much on my own. And that's not to say they weren't nice guys, because they're very, very cool guys, and I still talk to them when I see them at shows and stuff. But ultimately, it didn't do a whole lot for us. Mm-hmm. But the book got decent reviews, and people liked it, and got a nice mention in USA Today and stuff like that. So it definitely was like a cool experience, like having your first book like not be a total dud, at least critically. Like sales wise, it was garbage, but I haven't made any money in comics yet, so I'm still like working on that.
Are you finding does it have a tail at all? I mean, are you seeing at least a trickle coming constantly, or was it kind of just initially? You don't have to give specifics on numbers or anything like that.
There's nothing. Like coupled with like kickstarting and then the amount that we ended up putting into the book ourselves anyway, plus like shipping and all that stuff. Like it's not going to be paid off for a long time, and that's the same for most of the books that I've done that are creator owned. Like I'm definitely in the negatives in terms of what I've spent in comics. You
got to spend money to make money.
I hope so. It's been a while, so I'm hoping that comes soon. And it's like it's a long haul. And any like notable creators that you hear interviewed like will tell you that, and so I'm prepared for that. It's really like financially it's tough, but emotionally it's tough. Like it's just fucking punches you in the face at every turn, and I don't know what it's like to try and to really try and break into movies and TV and stuff, but like I can't imagine it, I mean I get. I totally understand, because I get those feelings when I'm turned down for an article pitch, or I'm reaching out to a guest for this show. They're like, "Nah, we don't want to do it." That gets me. Let alone something that you pour all your creative energy into, and months or years of work, and then that pans out that way. I mean, I think it's the same in either case. It's like something you're passionate about that you're doing, that you think has some value to the readers or listeners or whoever you're targeting, and then to someone be like, no, we're good. It's like it's pretty. The first couple times it's pretty brutal. After a while, you just get used to it. Like I have a proud pile of rejection letters and emails that every writer does. Stephen King will talk about his giant letter, his rejection letter pile, and it's like, and that's inspiring to hear that like everyone has that problem, but it doesn't make it any easier to swallow.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. But Footprints came out and it was well received, and it sort of like gave me a little bit of cred, I guess. Like it was always any coverage that I got was IGN writer blah 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 writes his own book, and it's like, why? Like if you were an accountant, would you put like accountant so and so writes Footprints? You know what I mean?
Well, it's like that thing you were mentioning earlier about having Green Lantern in parentheses next to Mars's name. Yeah. It's always going to be.
IGN.
it's like the lowest common denominator appeal of like, what can we put that people will know this person from, which I guess is a nice sentiment to some degree because they're trying to use what you've done before to get people to get eyes on it. But it can also be a little, not offensive, but put you down a little bit because that's not necessarily something you want to be known for forever.
Right. But, and it's not even that, not that I'm not proud of the work that I did or anything, but like, it's just, that's not my identity as a creative writer is not that. And it was put into perspective recently by my friend David Hyde, who does publicity for Z2 Comics, who's putting out Pawn Shop, and he was like, had sent me like a press release draft or something that had IGN in it. And I was like, dude, can we not? And he was like, look, I know that it might not be something that you want to do, but it is like a good calling card, and you should probably do it. I was like, okay, you're right, fine. Like, well,
maybe in a few years it'll be Pawn Shop, or it'll be.
I hope so.
Or it'll be Captain Ultimate, or
Yeah.
And or I saw that you had done some of the you've done some backup stories for some pretty big series like Sonic and stuff like that. How did that stuff come about? Was that like a job? Was that something you took on to pay the bills, or was it something that you really went for?
I mean, it was both. Like in terms of like if I had a choice of something at Archie to write, I'm not sure that I would have picked Sonic. I mean, I certainly love Sonic, and those comics are just like totally bananas and fun. But that came about because Paul Kaminsky, who is now at DC, but at the time was like the director of editorial or something at Archie, liked Captain Ultimate, and obviously that's like in the same sort of wheelhouse as the Sonic comics.
Yeah, like family friendly.
Yeah, like an all ages, big, like bombastic book.
Right.
And so like I had a meeting with him, and then it worked out, and we pitched this. He was like, we have space in Sonic, whatever issue it was, and do you want to do a story? And so he sent us some of the books, and we got caught up, and then we just pitched the story, and they liked it, and so that was that. So it was quick and painless. They were great to work with. I would love to work with Archie again. And it was kind of like, I know my co-writer on Captain Ultimate, my co-writer on Captain Ultimate is Ben Bailey, and his son.
I was going to say Ben?
Yeah, Ben. So Ben's son, Milo, is like a huge Sonic fan. He loves those comics, so it was kind of like cool for him to be like, hey, guess what, Milo? I'm writing a Sonic book.
Yeah, that is cool.
So it's finally his son loves him.
Finally. So I guess just kind of wrap things up a little bit. You mentioned at the very start some of the things you're working on. Can you talk about any of them, or are they all kind of veiled in secrecy because they're still?
I mean, they're not necessarily veiled in secrecy, but yeah, they're being pitched, and like in the past, I've had a bad habit of showing stuff off or like talking about things
too early
before they ever really materialize.
Right.
I show art and stuff once in a while on Twitter or whatever, but like sort of out of context. But yeah, there's definitely a bunch of new pitches that are in various stages. There's like a horror one. There's a sci-fi one. There's lots of different stuff. A western with all.
Again, sounds like you're not pinning yourself to any.
Yeah, thing. I feel like it's comics, and there should be a wide variety of different kinds of genres and stories, and why not try them all? You've
probably seen that just recently. I mean, everything. It used to be superheroes. Well,
yeah, I mean, it's
or comics.
Great right now. Like, there's just so many different options. There's always been a comic for everybody, but now it's just so much easier to find one. Right. So I'm working on all that stuff. There's some series, like I have 3 issues of a series in the can. It's a 6-issue miniseries. 3 issues are done. Just sort of waiting on being able to afford doing the rest of them, because that was a series that we, made an entire first issue, and the publishers didn't really work out. So we're going to do it on our own, I guess. But since I'm financing it, it's sort of like done in spurts when I can afford it.
Right.
And Captain Ultimate, there's also a few issues that are completely done. But that's another case of not being able to find a publisher for the print edition, which is a huge bummer. Like, as much diversity and as popular as things like Adventure Time and Bee and Puppy Cat are, like, people still are afraid of kids' comics that aren't attached to a license.
Right.
So we've taken that pretty much everywhere, and no one wants it. So that is going to be a situation where we have to probably Kickstarter the first print volume, which sucks because Kickstarter historically for me has been, I mean, I've done 3 campaigns and they've all been successful in terms of raising the funding, but there's always been problems after the fact in terms of like delays and everything, and I feel like all my Kickstarter karma is gone. Like all the good faith that people are willing to take in terms of like how long some projects take is just out the window. So I'm kind of nervous about doing that.
It's probably a different world than when you first did Footprints, because there's been people that have run off with money. I know just this week there was something about a game that someone ran off with the money somehow.
Oh yeah,
and
totally.
and stuff, and that has nothing to do with you, but just in kind of the public consciousness that it makes people probably a little bit more hesitant. In general,
exactly.
Hearing the horror stories.
And you'll see, like, I'll see people periodically tweet about like X number of Kickstarters that I've backed that I haven't gotten anything from.
Yeah.
You know, and like I know that my past 2, I Kickstarted the first Footprints. I did Pawn Shop initially on Kickstarter, and those were delivered, both of them late, but they were delivered. And the one now I Kickstarted was the Footprints one-shot, the sequel sort of book that, you know, it's done. They're arriving tomorrow, as a matter of fact, the issues finally. They've been at the printer since August, and for some reason it just took forever. And so those will be slowly going out in this month, but it's like I can't start another Kickstarter until that one's done, and even then it's like, do people still give a shit? So we wanted to do Captain Ultimate Volume 1 as a Kickstarter and then release that you know, ourselves in shops and all that stuff, and then start Volume 2 like digitally with Monkey Brain. And we've just been saving them like in the can because our releases were so sporadic, and it definitely hurt our momentum. And so when we come back, we want to make sure that we're monthly, you know?
Yeah.
And then maybe do like 6 issues and then another Kickstarter for the new volume and then the next 6 issues, etc. So we'll see if that plan works out, but that's the idea.
Great. Well, I hope everything works out great for you.
Thanks, man.
Thanks for coming on. Sounds like I'm going to be doing like a little thing before and after, but if you haven't checked out Joey's stuff, I'm telling you right now, directly to viewers or listeners rather, check out his stuff. What's your Twitter and website and things that people can find your stuff at?
My Twitter is just at Joey Esposito, and my website is also just joeyesposito.com. And I have like a Tumblr and Facebook and stuff, but if I'm not on Twitter, then there's something wrong. Like something has gone wrong in my life, because I love Twitter and I'm pretty addicted to it, which is sad, but
yeah,
there it is.
I'm much more of a lurker than I am a tweeter, but I'll go on spells where I'm just like tweeting all night. But
yep.
Great talk with Joey. Go support him. He deserves it. Great work. Thanks for listening. Next week on the show we have Canapa. His name is Callum May. I don't know what he wants to be called, but he is a YouTuber that reviews anime, those old Chinese cartoons you hear so much about. And we had a great talk. We're kind of internet acquaintances from years ago, probably 2. So we had a good conversation, and look forward to that next week. In the meantime, though, like Butterfly Effect on Facebook, Butterfly Effect Podcast. Follow on Twitter at Butterfly Pod. Subscribe on YouTube if that's how you prefer to get your listening done. Butterfly Effect Podcast. And if you listen to this on the site, you can subscribe via iTunes. If you're listening to this on iTunes, you can listen to it on the site. It's in multiple places. And again, that email for any suggestions, people you want to get on, feedback, whatever, is trettleman@gmail.com. Trettleman. Tr Ettleman. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next week.